Now, a state of disaster has officially been declared in KZN following devastating floods and landslides. Over 300 people have lost their lives and thousands are left homeless. Let's unpack this now with Northwest University's African Centre for Disaster Studies head, Professor Dewald van Niekerk. He joins us now virtually. Prof, thank you very much for your time. KZN being declared a disaster area in our country for obvious reasons, but what does this entail then? What does it mean in terms of money that is needed to be flushed in there to fix what's been damaged?
Good afternoon, sir. I think everyone in South Africa has become well aware of what a state of disaster means. We've been in this through 2 years of the COVID pandemic, and a similar situation now applies. A state of disaster means that a certain sphere of government is unable to deal with the consequences of a particular hazard, and that it warrants the declaration of a state of disaster, which would allow government to access contingency reserves, that the provincial and municipal governments can adjust their budgets, that certain tender procedures can be bypassed, and that we can basically ensure a swift response to a given situation. So that is the reason why we have a state of disaster. Unfortunately, we, in this case, had to declare the state of disaster as a reaction to an event that happened. Although the law makes provision for declaring a state of disaster for something that we can foresee to happen in the future as well. But this, unfortunately, is the nature of the beast we sit with now.
And what does this mean in terms of, the fact that National Treasury now needs to find the emergency funds to pump into KZN to fix what's broken, right? But already we are a country that, is seen not to have these funds. We already are in debt quite a bit. So where would ordinarily these funds, where would they come from? Does government even have funds that are, put to the side for something such as this?
Yes, we do have a contingency reserve at national government level. There's also supposed to be these reserve funds at provincial and at municipal level. Although with the misappropriation of funds in the past decades, it's become very unpopular for Treasury to allow these type of funds at provincial and local level as well. But they are supposed to be there, and they can be there according to the Public Financial Management Act and the Municipal Financial Management Act. So government now needs to access this contingency reserve, given the fact that we had to spend a huge amount and is still spending a huge amount on the COVID-19 response. In some way, the money needs to be found. I've seen in the past, the government has got this amazing ability at national level to find money that we might not know about. So I trust that a significant portion of funds will be found and given towards the rebuilding of KZN and the metropolitan municipality. Also, the municipalities and the provincial themselves need to now reprioritize their budgets. And to look at what are the priority projects that must be implemented and how can they recover.
I can imagine what a difficult task that will be, because the province is still reeling from what happened last year in July. But Prof, just explain to us in terms of when an area is, declared a disaster area, what does it mean for business and for communities? Well,
the only difference is that we acknowledge the fact that we are in peril and that government needs to implement certain extraordinary measures in order to manage the situation. It might mean that a portion of the disaster response funding will go towards businesses to rebuild themselves, to go towards communities to fix infrastructure and rebuild housing, etc. So that is what you at least would expect coming out of the funds being allocated to this state of disaster. But what we must also remember is that there is a huge portion of public insurance and private insurance that also comes into play, and that government through SASRIA and through obviously the private sector insurance companies also will have to spend quite a lot of money to fix what is damaged if it is covered under this insurance as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I think we just needed some clarity and understanding in terms of what exactly happens after this. But just one more quick question. KZN has been, declared a state, a disaster area before. This was in 2019, and I think there was even another time before that for the same reason. And there were funds that were allocated even then. So, what happens if, for instance, I think a lot of people are asking themselves about planning. We cannot always just take out the money. We know by now that KZN is prone to flooding, especially during this time of the year. It's not the first time it's happened. There's been money allocated before. 650 million was basically forecast for the last time. So, who's to be held accountable in terms of this happening again and being even more devastating than before? Shouldn't we be ready and learn from the previous time?
Yeah, one would certainly expect that to happen, but it's clearly not the case. In terms of accountability, the executive in a state of disaster is responsible. They are being held, also it's supposed to be held accountable for the spending and the response to a disaster situation. When a state of disaster is declared, as with the national state of disaster, the power now shifts to the executive of the province. Therefore, the Premier and MECs are responsible then to deal with the situation. We have to ask the question, what has happened to the funds in the past and on what has it been spent? I think we will be shocked to understand and see that it's not necessarily has gone to disaster risk reduction projects and initiatives. And I'm afraid to say that we are not seeing the light of day. We keep talking about natural disasters, and this is clearly not a natural disaster, and our politicians must realize this. And our decision makers and our top managers must realize this, that everything is in our ability to manage the situation. We just need to be accountable for of our actions. We need to be accountable to the public, and we need to spend public funds with a disaster risk lens linked to that. If we are not going to do that, I promise you we will sit again next year and have this conversation. And we will see corruption because of the tender procedure. We will see misspending. We will still see people continuously living in poverty, living in vulnerable conditions, and there's absolutely nothing being done to better that situation. So this, in effect, is a developmental issue that we need to address. We can't sit back and claim natural disaster, natural disaster. This is absolutely not a natural disaster.
Well, thank you very much for your insights, Prof. I think, I hope somebody in government is listening to you right now because, as I said a little earlier on, we have experienced this before. We've seen it happen before. 85 lives were lost back in 2019. Now we're sitting at over 300, so it's worsened. And therefore, what happened to the money that was, basically taken out by National Treasury for this problem to be, fixed, or at least to minimize the impact? What happened to that money, and why were we not prepared this time around? That was NWU's African Center for Disaster Studies head professor Dewald van Niekerk.